And now we're going to talk about, well, I suppose it is my favorite medium. I've spent a lot of my career working in out-of-home. I ran new business development for the Gannett Outdoor Group, which is at the time was one of the two largest out-of-home media companies in the U.S. And since then I've bought out-of-home on behalf of clients like BMW, Animal Planet, and Rite Aid drugstores, and insurance companies like New York Life. Anyway, so let's give a little background on out-of-home. The reason out-of-home is growing is that in today's world of almost infinite numbers of channels and viewing sources on computers and cable TV, where you never know who's going to see your ad and how many people will see it, and whether they can skip it or avoid it or whatever. Out-of-home is the last unavoidable medium. And until recently, it's had no content. It's just an ad. There's no magazine wrapped or newspaper or TV show or anything like that wrapped around it. In general, it's not the best medium for direct, although companies are trying to tie in mobile with it. So you'll see more capabilities with probably digital out-of-home tying in with mobile, particularly maybe not the roadside signs as much as the ones that you walk by on the street or in the shop or in a movie or whatever. In terms of its history, it was the first in the U.S., and for a while it was one of the only effective ways to get a message all across the country for national brands. So you see back in the early 20th century, Coca-Cola and cigarettes and cereals and different companies buying up billboards all across the country. When tobacco advertising left television in the 60s and 70s, they went very heavily into print, but they also, because they wanted to make sure their messages were seen, went very heavily into out-of-home, which was a boon and then a bane for the industry. And I know from people I've met that companies like Philip Morris, which does Marlboro, company representatives would ride around major cities with billboard company owners and say, put a billboard here, put a billboard here, and we'll buy it. We'll give you a 5-year contract. And but the problem is that eventually tobacco got banned from out-of-home, precisely because it's unavoidable, and people didn't want their children and teenagers, etc., seeing tobacco advertising. So, in fact, when I ran business development at Gannett Outdoor from 86 to 96, my job was to try to replace tobacco advertising, and we ended up, I think, doing a pretty good job of at least starting a lot of that off. And as we've seen with spending slides, the spending is growing and has been. Like radio, like TV, out-of-home is really up till now a local medium. It's bought city by city. It's measured by what used to be called the Traffic Audit Bureau. Now has a new name, which I think we'll get to a little later, just because not all out-of-home is viewed in a car, from a car. And out-of-home has been sold on daily GRP levels. Out-of-home can also be targeted to be in certain neighborhoods and zip codes and near certain types of businesses. I mean, a favorite way we used to sell out-of-home to companies like Procter & Gamble was we'd sell them a supermarket showing. We'd say, you can buy these 50 billboards located around the major stores in St. Louis and you can reach people on their way to shopping with, your message from Tide. And that was pretty effective. Until the advent of digital signage, the turnaround time for getting outdoor printed and shipped and pasted up was pretty slow, because the method of getting signs up was the same as it was back when, the Virginia colony was advertising in England to get people to go to America in the 1600s. That is, that people would have to go around with glue and brushes and glue the signs up, pretty much, or wrap them if they were a big piece of laminated material that had been computer printed. They'd have to, kind of wrap them and stretch them around the board, but it was heavy manual labor. And if you had a snowstorm or raining or floods or whatever, they wouldn't be able to get out. And if you're buying a market like Los Angeles, which is a huge market, you could be having to put up 200 or 300 posters as part of a showing. It could take a while. So, long turnaround. Now, with digital signage, which I'm sure most of you have seen on highways, those signs are, digitally connected, and you can load in Creative and press a button and off it goes. So, that's what's going on now. Now, with each media type, we've talked about creative. With radio, we talked about live reads and recorded copy, and we played the Stan Freberg tape, which said that, where else can you have a helicopter tow, a ton of chocolate sauce and dump it into Lake Michigan, theater of the mind. TV, we didn't need to say too much about creative. It's so effective as it is. But out of home, we have limitations in terms of the quality of the impression that we have been talking about. You can't do too much, particularly on a highway sign. Maybe in the subways, inside the cars, you can do a little bit more, but on a highway sign where someone could be passing it and only see it for a few seconds, you have to get your message across quickly. We've said it has to be legible. It has to be readable from a distance. It has to have contrast so that you can see the letters, so that you can see the brand name. But also out of home, particularly the larger formats, the bulletins, you can do 3D effects. You can have actual sort of objects. You can have, if you're Merrill Lynch, you can have the horns of the bull go above the billboard. So there are ways to be pretty creative. But overall, you want to keep it fairly simple. However, research, which we did at Gannett when I was working there, shows that the most memorable and effective out-of-home ads are not just basic, simple, we're the best sort of ads. They have to be provocative. The best ones get you to engage your brain and think a little bit. And so I call that combination provocative simplicity. Like haiku poetry. I don't know how many of you are familiar with haiku poems. Here's one. Haiku poems are supposed to have 17 syllables. 5 syllables in the first line, 7 in the second line, 5 in the third line. And this one obviously is translated from the Japanese, and it misses a little bit. Haiku poetry, by the way, is also supposed to somehow reflect the season and the day that it's written. Here are a couple of haiku poems. But you notice how they're short, but that they're provocative. They kind of make you think, what is this about? What is this trying to say? What is this a parallel for? And so this one is one that gets you to think a little bit. This is Absolute Vodka. One of my teams in the live class this year showed some Absolute ads and talked about them for branding. And it's a good example of it's branding for sure. There's not an offer in here. But what other kind of medium can you put an actual apartment, in your ad? Here's another one that's provocative. You see how the headline and the visual, you don't quite get it. You need to think a little bit. But when you do, you kind of warm up in a way. It makes you smile a little bit. And you get the message. But your brain is engaged in the ad. This is one of my favorites. This ran in Canada. It was an Obie Award winner. That's Creative Awards for the industry. And again, it's simple but provocative, and you get a benefit from it, right? You get warmth. So in addition to the highway signage, of course, there's so many other kinds of out of home. There are the street furniture up in the upper left. There's airport advertising. These are called dioramas. Here's elevator advertising, which is done by a company called Captivate, which is actually owned by Gannett. So the new name of the Traffic Audit Bureau is Geopath. So I'm not going to do it here as part of my lecture, but I would encourage you to go to the Geopath site and poke around a little bit. The industry association for out of home is the OAAA.org, Outdoor Advertising Association of America. And there's another association which is for digital place-based networks. You know, that when you see signage in a store or a gym, even cinema advertising is part of it. These people are trying to define a new kind of media form, which is place-based video, basically. And so that's their URL, and I'd encourage you to poke around on that a little bit. Now we're just going to break a minute. I'm going to show a film clip, which is maybe the future of out of home.